The Keeper of the Forgotten House. It was an early fall night, and the rain had been coming down in relentless sheets for hours, drumming a steady, unforgiving rhythm on the roof of our old SUV. My husband David and I had just sold our house in upstate New York, leaving behind the long, hard winters where snow piled high against the windows and the days stretched cold and gray. David had recently passed the bar and accepted a position at a small but well-regarded law firm in Virginia. The move to the Old Dominion felt like a new beginning for both of us, a chance to escape the brutal winters and embrace the warmth of a gentler climate. For me, there was the added joy of being closer to my parents, something I had longed for after years of living so far away. Everything we owned was packed into the U-Haul trailer hitched to the back, our entire life trailing behind us as we made the long journey south. The drive had gone smoothly, with the excitement of our fresh start buoying us, until the storm hit. Now, with the rain turning the world outside into a blur and the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the deluge, we were utterly lost, swallowed by the storm and the night. "Do you see any signs? Anything at all?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. My husband, David, squinted through the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "Nothing," he muttered. "Not even street signs. It's like we're driving through a wall of mud." I peered out into the storm, trying to make sense of the blurred landscape beyond the rain-soaked glass. The GPS had cut out miles back, and our phones had no signal. We hadn't seen another car for miles. It felt like we were the only ones left in the world, just us and the storm. I grew increasingly anxious as the rain intensified, flooding the roads and making the drive treacherous. I kept urging David to pull over, but he insisted we keep going. It wasn't until the downpour became so heavy that visibility dropped to nearly zero that even David agreed we needed to stop. Suddenly, the headlights picked up something. A driveway, barely visible through the mist and rain, veering off the main road. A massive, looming structure emerged at the end of it, partially obscured by fog. David slowed the car to a crawl. "Should we try up there? Big old house like that, maybe it's a bed and breakfast." I stared at the dark silhouette of the house ahead, a sense of unease crawling up my spine. The longer I looked, the more foreboding it seemed. "I don't know. It doesn't look like anyone's home," I said slowly, my breath fogging the window. "Well, it's either that or we sleep in the car," David replied, inching the SUV forward onto the muddy driveway. The wheels slipped and skidded, the trailer swaying ominously behind us. The closer we got to the house, the less it looked lived in. The windows were dark, the shutters crooked, some hanging by a single hinge. The columns at the front were cracked, vines creeping up their weathered surfaces. This wasn't a bed and breakfast, it was a relic of the past, long forgotten and abandoned. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my unease growing. "We don't really have a choice," David said, pulling up to what might have once been a grand front entrance. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, save for the pounding rain. We sat there for a moment, neither of us moving, the house looming in front of us like a ghost from another time. "Maybe we can at least wait out the storm inside," I said, trying to sound practical, but my stomach was knotted with anxiety. David nodded. "Let's check it out." We stepped out into the rain, immediately drenched. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something musty, decaying. We ran up the steps to the front porch, our shoes squelching in the mud. The wooden porch creaked beneath our feet, and I couldn't help but notice how the boards sagged, as if the house was tired of standing. "Look," David said, pointing to a pile of firewood, neatly chopped and stacked under a tarp. That alone struck me as odd. Someone had been here, recently enough to prepare for a fire. David tried the front door, and to my surprise, it creaked open with little effort. "That's convenient," I muttered under my breath. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Dust covered everything. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and the smell of mildew was thick in the air. old furniture draped in sheets, stood like forgotten ghosts in the shadows. "Hello?" David called out, his voice echoing in the vast empty space. No answer. "Maybe we should just wait in the car after all," I said, suddenly regretting this decision. But David was already moving toward the fireplace, tossing logs from the stack into the hearth. "We might as well get warm," he said. "It's freezing in here." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. There was something deeply wrong about this place. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. As the fire crackled to life, the flickering light cast strange shadows across the room. The rain pounded harder on the windows, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fire, but my mind kept drifting to the house itself. "Do you think anyone actually lives here?" I asked, glancing around at the decaying grandeur of the room. The old wallpaper was peeling, and the chandelier above us was coated in dust, its crystals dull and lifeless. "I doubt it," David replied. "But it doesn't matter. We'll just wait out the storm and leave first thing in the morning." I nodded, though something in the pit of my stomach told me morning wouldn't come soon enough. It started slowly at first, a creak from upstairs, like someone walking across old floorboards. I told myself it was the wind, the house settling in the storm. But then I heard it again, more deliberate, like footsteps. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart beginning to race. David paused, listening. "It's an old house, probably just—" The sound of something scraping against the wall interrupted him. It was coming from the hallway that led deeper into the house, out of sight. "Okay, that I heard," David said, his voice now tinged with unease. He stood up, looking toward the dark hallway. We exchanged a look, neither of us wanting to admit we were scared. "Let's just stick by the fire," I said quickly. "No need to go exploring." But as soon as I said it, the lights, what little there were, flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from the fire, casting long, twisted shadows around the room. Then the footsteps started again. This time they were closer, and they were not coming from upstairs. I grabbed David's arm, my pulse racing. "We need to leave. Now." He nodded, grabbing his jacket and reaching for my hand. Just as we turned toward the door, a loud bang echoed through the house, like a door slamming shut. "Who's there?" David shouted, his voice cracking. No answer, only the sound of the wind, the rain, and those footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it. Just beyond the doorway, in the faint glow of the fire, a figure barely visible standing in the hallway. It was watching us, its face obscured by the darkness. "Go!" I screamed, yanking David toward the front door. Just as his fingertips felt the cold brass of the knob, all by itself, the door slammed hard in our faces. The bang echoed through the house, loud enough to drown out the storm howling outside. My pulse raced as I stared at the door, realizing it wasn't the wind. David tugged at the handle, yanking with all his strength, but the door wouldn't budge. "It's stuck!" he yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Go!" I screamed, yanking David toward the front door. Just as his fingertips felt the cold brass of the knob, all by itself, the door slammed hard in our faces. The bang echoed through the house, loud enough to drown out the storm howling outside. My pulse raced as I stared at the door, realizing it wasn't the wind. David tugged at the handle, yanking with all his strength, but the door wouldn't budge. "It's stuck!" he yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Try harder!" I shouted, glancing over my shoulder. The air around us felt heavy, thick with something unseen. My skin prickled with the sense that we weren't alone anymore. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. It wasn't the kind of chill that came from the storm. It was bone deep, as though the very air had frozen around us. A low creak echoed from behind, the sound of something shifting, something moving in the shadows. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible in the dim light of David's phone. It stood at the far end of the hallway, a dark silhouette that seemed to flicker in and out of sight, as if the house itself was breathing it into existence. My breath caught in my throat as the figure stepped forward, its movement slow, deliberate, as if it was studying us. The figure emerged further from the darkness, and I saw it clearly. A woman, her pale face gaunt, eyes hollow. Her clothes were old, tattered, a gown that might have once been white but was now stained with something dark and unsettling. Her eyes, though empty, locked onto mine. "David," I whispered. He turned, and I saw the shock on his face as his gaze landed on the apparition. "Oh my God," he breathed. Without warning, the figure moved, swiftly, impossibly fast, gliding across the floor toward us. My body reacted before my brain did. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing David's arm and pulling him toward the stairs. We stumbled, tripping over the uneven floorboards, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I could hear it behind us, the soft whisper of fabric dragging across the floor, the faint creak of old bones moving. We bolted up the staircase, the wood groaning under our weight. Every step felt like it stretched into eternity, as if the house itself was trying to slow us down. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but fear drove me forward. At the top of the stairs, we found ourselves in a long, narrow corridor lined with closed doors. David tried one, then another, both locked. "Damn it!" he shouted, pounding on the wood. The footsteps were closer now. I could feel it, that creeping cold pressing in around us, suffocating. "David, hurry," I urged, my voice trembling. Finally, the third door gave way, and we stumbled into a large bedroom. David slammed the door shut behind us and threw the latch, his chest heaving with each breath. I collapsed against the wall, gasping, my heart racing. For a moment, all was silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing. But then, the door rattled. A soft, almost hesitant knock echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone or something scratching at the wood. "Lucy," David whispered, his face pale. "It's trying to get in." I backed away from the door, shaking my head in disbelief. This can't be happening. It's not real. But it was real. The door rattled again, harder this time, as though the thing outside was growing impatient. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, anywhere to hide. David grabbed a heavy wooden chair and wedged it under the door handle. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice tight with fear. I rushed to the window and peered outside. The storm was still raging, rain lashing against the glass in sheets. We were too high up to jump, and the roof below looked slick with water. My stomach twisted with dread. "There's no way out," I said, my voice barely audible. The door shuddered violently, and the chair creaked under the pressure. The air in the room grew colder, the oppressive feeling of dread sinking deeper into my bones. And then the door exploded inward with a force that sent the chair flying across the room. The apparition filled the doorway, its eyes locked on us, and for the first time, it opened its mouth. A horrible, gaping maw that emitted no sound but filled the air with a sense of despair so deep it almost crushed me. "Run!" David shouted, pulling me toward the far side of the room. But there was nowhere to run. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls closing in, and I could feel the darkness pressing down, suffocating. The apparition moved closer, its twisted hands reaching out toward us. Desperation clawed at my throat. My mind raced, searching for anything that could save us. "Please," I whispered, not even sure who or what I was begging. "Please let us go." The figure paused just inches from us, its empty eyes staring through me as if weighing my words. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in its face, a flash of recognition, or maybe pity. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, The figure vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. The room fell silent. David and I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My legs trembled beneath me and I collapsed to the floor, my heart still pounding in my chest. "What the hell was that?" David whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I gasped, my eyes darting to the open door, half expecting the figure to reappear. "But we need to get out of here, now!" David nodded, helping me to my feet. We didn't waste another second. Together, we ran back down the stairs, through the dark halls of the house, and out into the storm. We didn't stop until we reached the car, soaked to the bone and shaking. David fumbled with the keys, and for a heart-stopping moment, the engine wouldn't start. But then, with a sputter, it roared to life, and we sped down the muddy driveway, never looking back. Whatever haunted that house, whatever had wanted us, it had let us go. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped, that it was still watching, waiting for another chance.